How Stalin starved millions in the Ukrainian famine. At the height of the 1932-33 Ukrainian famine under Joseph Stalin, starving people roamed the countryside, desperate for something, anything to eat. In the village of Stavishishke, a young peasant boy watched as the wanderers dug into empty gardens with their bare hands. Many were so emaciated, he recalled, that their bodies began to swell and stink from the extreme lack of nutrients. You could see them walking about, just walking and walking, and one would drop, and then another, and so on it went. He said many years later, in a case history collected by the late 1980s by a congressional commission. In the cemetery outside the village hospital, overwhelmed doctors carried the bodies on stretchers and tossed them into an enormous pit. The Holodomor death toll. The Ukrainian famine, known as a Holodomor, a combination of the Ukrainian words for starvation and to inflict death, by one estimate, claimed the lives of 3.9 million people, about 13% of the population. And unlike other famines in history caused by blight or drought, this was caused when a dictator wanted both to replace Ukraine's small farms with state-run collectives and punish independence-minded Ukrainians who posed a threat to his totalitarian authority. The Ukrainian famine was a clear case of a man-made famine, explains Alex Duvall, executive director of the World Peace Foundation at Tufts University and author of the 2018 book, Mass Starvation, The History and Future of Famine. He describes it as a hybrid of a famine caused by tumultuous social economic policies and one aimed at a particular population for repression or punishment. In those days, Ukraine, a Texas-sized nation along the Black Sea to the west of Russia, was a part of the Soviet Union, then ruled by Stalin. In 1929, as part of his plan to rapidly create a totally communist economy, Stalin imposed collectivization, which replaced individually owned and operated farms with big state-run collectives. Ukraine's small, mostly subsistence farmers resisted giving up their land and livelihoods. Ukrainian famine. In response, the Soviet regime derided the resistors as kulaks, well-to-do peasants, who, in Soviet ideology, were considered enemies of the state. Soviet officials drove these peasants off their farms by force, and Stalin's secret police made plans to deport 50,000 Ukrainian farm families to Siberia. Historian Anne Applebaum writes in her 2017 book, Red Famine, Stalin's War on Ukraine. Stalin appears to have been motivated by the goal of transforming the Ukrainian nation into his idea of a modern proletarian socialist nation, even if this entailed the physical destruction of broad sections of its population, says Trevor Erlacher, a historian and author specializing in modern Ukraine and an academic advisor at the University of Pittsburgh's Center for Russian, Eastern European, and Eurasian Studies. Collectivization in Ukraine didn't go very well. By the end of 1932, around the time that Stalin's wife, who reportedly objected to his collectivization policy, committed suicide, it became apparent that Ukraine's grain harvest was going to miss Soviet planners' target by 60%. There still might have been enough food for Ukrainian peasants to get by, but, as Applebaum writes, Stalin then ordered what little they had been confiscated as punishment for not meeting quotas.